They called it the Crown Gala, a $10 million fundraiser. 100 of New York's wealthiest dressed in tuxedos and gowns, sipping Cristal under chandeliers imported from Vienna. The ballroom on the 67th floor of the Skyline Regency Hotel sparkled like a diamond box. Everything was perfect, until one man pointed. "Hey, Tanya, bring your son over here," Chad Whitmore said, half laughing, half challenging. He was tall, tanned, and terrifyingly confident, the type of man who could buy a building with a handshake. "You say he plays chess, right? Let's see if the janitor's boy knows what a rook does." The laughter started small, a ripple from the center of the room. Then it spread, like a crack in a frozen lake, people chuckling behind champagne flutes, trading smug glances. Elijah Banks, 16, stepped forward. His hands didn't shake. His eyes didn't blink. He just looked at the board and smiled. But it wasn't a smile of gratitude. It wasn't nervous. It was still, controlled, like the moment before a thunderstorm hits and the wind dies down. Tanya, his mother, froze beside a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres. She had scrubbed the floors of this hotel for 12 years. 12 years of "yes, ma'am," "of course, sir," and tips that never matched the labor. Now she stood watching her son being invited, not as a guest, but as a punchline. Chad smirked, waving toward the luxury chessboard imported from Italy. "This thing cost more than his apartment," he said to a group of investment bankers. But Elijah said nothing. He sat down slowly, placed his fingers gently on the night, and waited. Not for applause, not for pity. He was waiting for the first move. Because this wasn't a game to him. This was justice, with 64 squares. And what happened next would silence an entire room and turn a quiet teenager from the Bronx into a national headline. Elijah Banks wasn't supposed to be in that ballroom, not according to the world, not according to the zip code printed on every envelope addressed to Apartment 3B, South Bronx housing complex. His mom, Tanya, worked 6 days a week at the Skyline Regency Hotel, housekeeping supervisor, 12-hour shifts. She always wore the same beat-up sneakers, because she'd rather buy Elijah new textbooks than a new pair of shoes for herself. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet and neighbors who argued with the walls. Elijah's bedroom was really just the corner of the living room with a $12 folding table from Walmart and a second-hand lamp with a cracked shade. But that corner held a secret. It held ambition, obsession, fire. Because while most boys his age were gaming online, Elijah was studying. He didn't learn chess from some prep school club or a private coach with an Eastern European accent. He learned from YouTube, from dusty library books, from a broken Kindle Fire he borrowed from his cousin. Every night after homework, while the rest of the complex fell asleep under flickering streetlights, Elijah would sit at that folding table with a thrift store chessboard, wooden pieces worn down by someone else's memories, and lose himself in strategy. He didn't just play games, he broke them down, studied Kasparov, Fischer, Nakamura, Alpha Zero. He memorized endgames the way other kids memorized lyrics. He'd play against himself, white versus black, like he was both predator and prey, thinking 10 moves ahead on both sides. One time, he saved up $22 from doing odd jobs and entered a local scholastic chess tournament. He wore a shirt that was too small and shoes that squeaked on every step. He won 4 games in a row, then was quietly disqualified. Why? Because he didn't belong to a registered club. No official coach, no uniform, no name they recognized. And just like that, he was erased. He didn't cry. He walked home in silence, carrying a plastic trophy that meant nothing, and a fire that meant everything. That was 2 years ago. Since then, he stopped trying to be seen. Instead, he focused on becoming undeniable. Tanya noticed it. The way he woke up at 5 a.m. every morning just to solve puzzles before school. How he skipped parties, avoided social media, and lost himself in the rhythm of control and chaos on the 64-square battlefield. He barely spoke at dinner, not out of teenage angst, but because his mind was always 3 moves ahead of everything. Tanya would watch him sometimes, this boy, her boy, who never asked for anything, but deserved everything. She knew the world wasn't fair. She had scrubbed too many luxury bathtubs and watched too many executives treat her like wallpaper to believe in fairness. But she believed in Elijah, and that was enough to get up every morning. So when she got the call to help serve at the Crown Gala that night, she didn't think twice. It was extra hours, extra pay, nothing more. Until Elijah showed up at the hotel that evening to drop off her work gloves she'd left at home. She didn't expect him to step foot into that ballroom. He didn't expect to be noticed. But then, Chad Whitmore pointed, and the room turned. And just like that, Elijah Banks from apartment 3B was no longer invisible. He was in the spotlight, and this time, he was ready. The board sat at the center of the ballroom like a stage, an imported Italian marble chess set polished to a gleam under chandelier light. Each piece carved by hand, each one probably worth more than Elijah's rent for a year. Chad Whitmore leaned back in his velvet chair, swirling a glass of $600 scotch like he was born with it in his hand. "So," he said, loud enough for the room to hush, "the maid's boy thinks he can play chess?" He smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind you give when you know the joke is at someone else's expense. "Elijah, is it? Have a seat, champ. Let's see what you got. Move a piece. Show us a trick or two." Elijah didn't flinch. He walked to the board in silence. Behind him, murmurs fluttered through the crowd like moths around a flame. One woman near the back whispered, "This is uncomfortable." A man next to her replied, "Come on, it's just fun. Lighten up." Senator Valerie Green sipped her wine without speaking, her eyes locked on the boy. Her brows drawn, like she was watching something she didn't agree to. Tanya stood frozen behind a drinks cart, her tray trembling just enough to make the glasses sing. Her lips moved silently, mouthing a prayer she hadn't used in years. Chad gestured toward the board dramatically. "I'll be white. Family tradition," he said, grinning. "And I'll go easy on you." He looked toward his friends. "Should we make it interesting?" The crowd chuckled. "If he lasts 10 moves," Chad announced, "I'll donate 10 grand to—" "What's that school in the Bronx, Tanya?" "The one with the rats?" Laughter. Some polite, some cruel, some trying to pretend it was still okay. Elijah sat down across from him, still no words, just eyes, sharp, calculating, quiet. He watched the room, not just the board. He saw who was smirking, who was looking away, who was filming on their phones. He saw it all. Chad made the opening move, E4, a basic king's pawn opening, confident, safe. "You know what that means, kid?" he said. "Don't worry, I'll teach you." Elijah reached forward and responded instantly. C5, the Sicilian defense. A few guests blinked. One even raised an eyebrow. Chad paused for a second too long. That was the first sign, but he recovered quickly with a laugh. "Ooh, aggressive. Look at this kid." The next few moves followed, a variation of the accelerated dragon. and something changed. The mood. No longer laughter. Now, a quiet discomfort. Even those who didn't know chess felt it. One guest leaned toward Senator Green. "I think the kid's actually winning?" Green didn't answer. She just watched. Chad was smiling less now. His knee bounced. He took longer between moves. Elijah, meanwhile, moved like a metronome. Calm, steady, inevitable. But Chad couldn't help himself. "Tell me, Elijah," he said, forcing a grin. "Do you play between janitor shifts? Or just when the Wi-Fi at the shelter works?" That one hit hard. Even the laughter was thin now. Forced. Nervous. Elijah didn't respond. He just stared at the board, then looked up, at his mother. And when their eyes met, Tanya felt it. Something rising. Something long buried. This wasn't about a game. Not really. This was years of back-breaking work, reduced to a joke. This was every yes, sir, every late-night bus ride, every callus on her hands, spilled across this board. Chad leaned forward, smug again. "Come on, boy. Show us a trick." Elijah didn't blink. He just moved his knight, a quiet, simple move. But the entire room felt it. The trap had begun, and no one, not even Chad, knew they were already inside it. By the sixth move, something had shifted. Not on the board, at least not for most of the guests who didn't know a bishop from a butler, but the ones who did. They were watching closely now. Brandon Patel, a low-profile tech billionaire in a navy blazer and white sneakers, leaned forward. He wasn't watching Chad, he was watching the boy. Elijah just fianchettoed his bishop, he muttered under his breath. "That's not a beginner move." Chad laughed too loudly. "That's right, kid. Get your pieces out. Look sharp for the cameras." But his smile was cracking at the edges. He moved slower now, each move ending with a glance. At the board, at the boy, at the room that wasn't laughing as much anymore. Elijah, meanwhile, never looked rushed. He didn't just play like someone who knew the game. He played like someone who had lived inside the game, like he was remembering, not reacting. Pawn to d6, knight to f6, bishop to g7. Every piece slid across the board with surgical intent. He wasn't defending. He was building. A trap. A rhythm. A silence so loud you could hear the air shift between moves. Someone whispered, "Is he setting up a dragon?" Senator Green crossed her arms and stared. Brandon Patel nodded slowly. "Yes. Accelerated. And clean." Chad's face flushed red for a second, but he covered it with another joke. "Wow, fancy moves. Where'd you learn that, YouTube?" Elijah didn't answer. He just played his next move. A small sacrifice. A pawn. A nothing piece. Chad snorted. "You're giving me material already? This'll be easier than I thought." But Brandon stiffened. "Number that's not a blunder, that's bait." And suddenly, it clicked. It wasn't just that Elijah was playing well, he was controlling the tempo, the pace of the game. He was setting the rhythm, and Chad was dancing to it, like a conductor waving from the shadows. Tanya noticed it too. She had seen Elijah this way before, only twice. Once, when he beat a substitute teacher in mental math so fast, the whole class stopped breathing. And once, when he solved a Rubik's Cube, blindfolded in, under 90 seconds for a school talent show. That look in his eyes? That wasn't confidence. It was focus sharpened into steel. By move 12, Chad began to sweat. He dabbed at his forehead, licked his lips, checked his watch. He moved his rook out, exposing his king's side slightly, careless. And Elijah paused. Just for 3 seconds, just enough to make Chad believe he didn't see it. Then, bam, knight repositioned, diagonal threat exposed. The trap tightened. The ballroom was no longer full of noise. No laughter, no toasts, just the sound of pieces clicking and pride crumbling. Brandon leaned to Green. "Chad's 2 moves from disaster. He doesn't even see it." She nodded. "Good." From across the room, someone whispered, "He's not just playing the game, he's teaching it." That's when Chad broke the silence. "You think this is cute, huh?" he snapped. "You think humiliating me in front of my guests makes you something special?" Elijah finally looked up. His voice was calm, low, but it carried through the whole ballroom. "I'm not here to humiliate you, sir. I'm here because you invited me." Then he moved again. Another piece locked into place. Another breath caught in someone's throat. And just like that, the trap closed. Chad leaned back in his chair, trying to mask the storm behind his eyes. But the way his hand gripped the edge of the table betrayed him. The wine glass beside him trembled, not from movement, but from a man slowly realizing he was in over his head. The ballroom, once a sea of murmurs and laughter, was now dead silent, except for the quiet clicking of chess pieces and the pounding of Chad's pride. He stared at the board. It didn't make sense. This kid was supposed to be a pawn, appropriate aid, a story to tell later with a smirk over drinks. But now he was on the verge of losing, badly, publicly. He moved his bishop, a rushed, clumsy choice, leaving his queen dangling, exposed. Across the table, Elijah didn't blink, didn't gloat. He just moved. Queen to H5. The room gasped. Even those who didn't understand chess could feel something shift, like watching dominoes topple in slow motion. Senator Green leaned forward. Her jaw tightened. Brandon Patel exhaled. "He's done. That's mate in 4. Chad sat frozen. He tried to laugh it off. Okay, a lucky guess. Let's slow it down. I wasn't really trying." But no one laughed with him, because the trap was visible now. And the king, cornered. Chad moved again, desperately, aimlessly. But Elijah had already calculated it 3 moves ago. Knight to G6, bishop to E7, rook lifted, king blocked. Then, queen slides in, clean, smooth, final. Checkmate. It was silent, like the moment after a verdict, like thunder without the lightning. Tanya gasped softly, her hand over her mouth. Chad's eyes scanned the board again, like the pieces would magically rearrange. They didn't. He looked up at Elijah, searching for something. Mercy, explanation, escape. But Elijah only said, "Checkmate, sir." No flair, no celebration, just truth, laid bare in 4 moves. Someone clapped. It was Brandon. Then Senator Green. Then the ripple spread. One guest, then another. Then the entire ballroom. Not polite applause, but something deeper. Recognition. Respect. Chad stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. The queen piece fell to the floor and rolled toward the velvet carpet. "This is rigged," he muttered. He memorized that. Someone trained him. That's not real talent. That's set up. But no one believed him. Brandon walked over, calm and deliberate. "I've played chess for 30 years, Chad," he said softly. "I couldn't have countered that sequence." Chad tried to laugh, but it cracked in his throat. Elijah stood slowly. The room watched him now, not as a joke, not as an accessory to his mother's job, but as the most powerful presence in the room. He turned to Tanya and nodded once. She nodded back, tears welling, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Then Elijah looked at Chad one last time. "You didn't lose to a trick," he said. "You lost to someone you didn't bother to see." With that, he placed the queen back on the board, exactly where it had landed, like signing his name. Brandon stepped in again. "Elijah," he said, "what are you doing next weekend?" "I don't know," Elijah replied. "You do now," Brandon said, offering a card. "Let's talk scholarship, maybe mentorship, maybe both." Chad watched, helpless, as power slipped right past him, into hands he'd never expected, into the hands of a boy from apartment 3B. The queen piece still lay on the carpet. No one picked it up. No one moved. The once glamorous ballroom, the same place where laughter echoed, where condescension flowed as easily as champagne, now sat under a heavy silence. And at the center of it all stood a boy. A quiet kid from the Bronx who had just dismantled a millionaire's ego in front of New York's elite. Chad Whitmore remained frozen, one hand still gripping the side of the table as if it were the last thing anchoring him to relevance. No one offered him a napkin. No one made excuses for him. Not this time. Instead, all eyes turned toward Elijah. The ripple had begun. Senator Green was the first to break the stillness. She stepped forward, heels clicking like a gavel on polished marble. "Elijah," she said gently, "have you ever considered applying to the Capital Scholars Initiative? I sit on the board. I'd be honored to sponsor you." Before he could answer, Brandon Patel added, "He's already got my number. And if he wants a full scholarship plus a seat in our mentorship program, it's his." From the side, a journalist for the New York Ledger was already typing on her phone. Headline: "Teen Janitor's Son. Checkmates tech mogul in viral gala standoff." Because yes, someone had been recording, and yes, it had already gone live. Within 15 minutes, the clip hit 500,000 views. By midnight, it was trending. And by morning, Elijah's name would be on every screen in America. But in that moment, he didn't know any of that. He didn't need to. He had already won. Tanya finally stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron, chin high. She walked up to Chad, looked him square in the eyes. The same man who once asked her if she knew how to use the espresso machine yet. Her voice was calm, stronger than it had ever sounded inside those walls. "You tried to make my son a joke," she said, "but he became the lesson." Chad opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Guests began gathering their coats, not in a rush, but with purpose, with shame. A few nodded at Elijah as they passed. A few couldn't meet his eyes. Brandon clapped him on the shoulder. "Be ready," he said. "This moment, it's bigger than you think." Elijah nodded. "I know," he said softly. "That's why I stayed quiet. People only hear the truth when the noise dies down." A few feet away, the queen piece had finally stopped rolling. It rested on its side, just beneath the edge of Chad's chair. Tanya bent down and picked it up. Not for him, but for her son. She handed it to Elijah, who held it for a beat, then placed it gently into his pocket. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. They wanted a show. He gave them a checkmate. And in the silence that followed, the room turned. Not because he demanded respect, but because he left no other choice. 6 weeks later, Elijah sat in front of a microphone under soft studio lights. He wore a navy hoodie, no suit, no pretense, just him. Beside him was Senator Valerie Green, hosting her podcast, Voices That Matter. Millions were already listening. She leaned in. "Elijah, I think what everyone wants to know is, what was going through your mind that night?" Elijah didn't rush his answer. He stared at the mic for a second, then smiled, just barely. "It wasn't about the game," he said. "It was about being seen." Green nodded. Seen? He looked up. When someone like Chad looks at someone like me, he doesn't see a person. He sees a label, a role, the Maid's son, a charity case. That night I wasn't supposed to win. I wasn't supposed to matter. But the board didn't care where I came from. It didn't care how I dressed. It didn't care if my mom cleaned the floor 5 minutes before. It only asked me one thing. Can you play? The room went quiet. Not because of what he said, but because of how true it was. I studied chess because it taught me structure when my life had none. It gave me control when the world didn't. It reminded me that even the smallest piece, the pawn, can cross the board and become a queen. He paused. People call what happened that night a checkmate, but really, it was just clarity. Green leaned forward. What would you say to someone who feels like they're always underestimated? Elijah thought about it, then answered, Don't waste your energy trying to be loud. Let your work speak. Let your calm be your confidence. Move like a king, even if they call you a pawn. Because if you play your position long enough, they'll have no choice but to learn your name. Tanya at home, hanging a framed photo of Elijah receiving his full scholarship award from the Patel Foundation. Next to it, tucked into the frame, was a single chess piece, the Queen. Some wins aren't loud. They don't trend. They don't get applause right away. But they last. Because when you win with character, when you rise without stepping on others, that's not just victory. That's legacy. If this story moved you, drop your city in the comments and tell us, when did you prove someone wrong without ever raising your voice? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us. True power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and never needing to explain it. Have you ever been underestimated just because of where you came from, how you looked, or what you didn't have? What did you do in that moment, and how did you prove them wrong? Drop your story in the comments, like if this inspired you, and share it with someone who needs this today.